Dan, I thought I had this very original take about Anthony
Hmm.
Edwards becoming the face of the NBA after that win to get into the Western Conference Finals. But Stephen A's already beaten me to it. How close are we, do you think? Because I don't think we're there yet, but how close are we, you think, Anthony Edwards inserting himself in that conversation?
There's a real window for him
Yeah,
to become like a super duper star, and
22
it
years old.
comes from it comes from this discussion that has been kind of happening behind the scenes around the NBA over the last couple of years, which is who's the next American-born most valuable player.
Hmm.
This is a real conversation that I've had with people because you look at the best players in the league and you see people like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Victor Wembanyama coming, right? And it's sort of like this tier of player, and it was sort of like, well, who's next? It sort of felt like the door had opened and shut up for Jason Tatum on that, probably unfairly. But as a guy like he's a
Right.
very common answer. Maybe Devin Booker would have been a common answer. John Morant certainly would have been in that conversation before his off court stuff and injuries. So there was a vacuum, right? Like there was somebody, we were like, people were sort of waiting for somebody to step into that void. And here comes this incredibly charismatic, incredibly talented, incredibly tough player in Anthony Edwards. The moment feels like it's there for him. I am much more like I would rather wait and make this point in 6 months type of a person, generally speaking. Like I'd rather, I think, observe than opine on it. But I will say that I think like he has all of the tools that you would want from that kind of player in terms of the style he plays. He plays both sides of the basketball, and he's incredibly exciting, right? And you saw it throughout this series, kind of his confidence and his charisma. These are the things you want from that kind of a player. Is he perfectly cast? Probably not, but I think he's a good one. It to me, Judson, what it speaks more to though is just like how wide open the league
Yep.
is right now in general, right? Like because a week ago we would have been talking about Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves blowing 2 games in a row at home, like having the series, in their hands and fumbling it. And the defending champs being the impossible team to beat. It really is a time where you look around the league and it just feels like you could talk yourself into one of 20 teams at any given point.
Yeah, one of the things I love about Anthony Edwards too is there is nothing that is somewhat cookie cutter about him, or he doesn't seem to really think too much about what others have to say about him. Right? He's very
Mm-hmm.
authentic. He's somewhat raw, like waving goodbye to the crowd in Denver. But I felt like for at least the last 2 seasons, I felt like if I could be courtside to see one guy in the NBA, Anthony Edwards, because of that ability above the rim, explosive, who he is. I felt like he would be the guy that I would have to see. But Dan, you're in LA. You were in Chicago, your hometown recently. What was your time like around Bronny James? I've always been, to have a dad who is just a worldwide star. I've always been really impressed with how Bronny seemed to carry himself. Now we can get to the player, but just the kid and now the young man, I've always been really impressed by him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the right sort of mixture of like humility, while also not being like outrageously oblivious to your privilege,
Mhm.
right? Like it's
Yeah.
like being able to thread like, and that's an authenticity thing, right? Like, I remember there was one point. So Bronny hasn't done like any media like in about a year. He didn't do any at USC. That was a decision that he made with his family and with Clutch Sports and his representations and stuff. Like, so we haven't really heard from him since he had the cardiac arrest. Did very little media before that, right? Like, I think he talked at the Hoop Summit, maybe the McDonald's All American game. That was about it. And so, you know, his media availability on Tuesday in Chicago was like, a real event. Much more so than you would for a prospect that you have tabbed, you know, late in the second round, maybe on a two-way deal or something like that. And he carried himself like he deserved the moment, like he deserved the attention without it being cocky and confident. Like at one point, somebody asked him, "Are you used to all of this?" And you look at all the cameras that are focused on him, and he kind of smiled and shrugged and be like, "It was, yeah, I'm used to it, but that doesn't make it less weird."
Hmm.
And I thought that was like a really mature answer. It is weird. Fame is weird. You know what I mean? But you also get used to it. His dad is as good at being famous as maybe anybody I've ever been around. Super, super good at it. And so he carried himself with the right sort of attitude, the right sort of ease. I thought it was telling. I had asked him at one point, somebody had asked him about being kind of a floor general or something like that. And he said, that's not who I am as a player. So I asked him, like, well, when you watch the game now, like, who do you see as guys who impact winning in the way that you can? And I think it was either right away or second. He said Davion Mitchell from the Sacramento Kings, right? Which is undersized, defensive minded, kind of guard. Now, Davion Mitchell was a really good player in college, right? And was a lottery pick and stuff. And, he mentioned Derek White, he mentioned Drew Holiday. But I mean, I think by picking those kinds of players, right, it does speak to a player who seems comfortable in a role, understanding, which is a huge step ahead when it comes in this process, right? If you come into the league drafted where Bronny's probably going to get drafted and you think you are going to get all the shots, get all the accolades, get all the attention, you're mistaken. That's not really how it works. But if you come in the league and you embrace the little things, you have a chance. And I think when I've talked to people who are most bullish on him, they think his, things like him embracing the little things combined with his athleticism, combined with his work ethic, certainly in pedigree, give him a chance. And outside of 25, Judson, like, generally speaking in an NBA draft, like, that's all you can really hope for is a player who has the best chance. And I think people scoff at the numbers and stuff like that, but I think, intangible wise, like, he checked all the boxes in Chicago.
I thought that the piece that you wrote in the LA Times was really good. I did cringe just seeing in print 6'1.5". If you combine with over 4 points a game at USC, 6'1.5", and you wonder why he's there and not just looking for the next opportunity to prove himself in college. I wish I had, because I tried to work my way through having a really, really firm take of why the Bulls at number 11, with kind of them being going nowhere, somewhat stuck in no man's land, and the draft being, I don't, I'll ask you at some point, but the draft being one of the worst I've read in the last 25 years from a talent standpoint, where if your number 11 pick is more like a number 20, a number 21, a number 22, would you think about taking a flyer on Bronny James because you could somehow get LeBron or end up with LeBron in a year or two? But I kept on falling back on, do you want a meddling dad? Right? Like, is LeBron meddling with your roster decisions with Bronny if he's not on the team? And then what is it like when he's on the team? Like, the father-son, this is not Ken Griffey Sr. to Ken Griffey Jr., where it's easy to throw that young kid out in center field, right? It feels a bit nonsensical, even if LeBron is still playing at a really high level.
Yeah, so I think we should start with the fact that I think, like, yeah, teams are talking about it. I don't know that Chicago has had that meeting, but teams have had that meeting, right? Like, LeBron James can be an unrestricted free agent this summer. I think the overwhelming expectation is he will opt out of his contract with the Lakers. The overwhelming expectation is that he will then re-sign with the Los Angeles Lakers. Most people believe this to be, if not quite fait accompli, like something that will almost certainly happen. But in that almost certainly area, there are some teams at the end of the first round who have picks, some who have multiple picks, who are looking at things and saying, well, like, maybe there's a window here. Maybe there's a chance that, that deal isn't sealed. The Lakers don't have a head coach. Maybe they hire the wrong guy. Maybe the roster doesn't improve the ways that LeBron James wants the roster to improve. And if all of these situations break the right way and we have his son on our team and we're close to winning, maybe we can sell him on a championship and a chance to put the Sun at a pay cut. Something that LeBron has never discussed really taking. I don't think anybody really believes he will do it again. Did it in Miami. I don't think it'll ever happen again. But, like, it's worth the conversation, Judson, right? So I don't think Chicago checks those boxes.
No.
I don't think they're a LeBron James away from a title. I think the draft is still close enough at 11 where, like, there's a chance you might end up with the best player.
Yeah.
Like, I think people, like, actually sort of believe that about this draft. Like, the guy who's number 3 on
the Bulls aspect definitely is not about a championship. The Bulls do one thing better than anybody else, and that is attendance. And
yeah, so they sell already.
Yeah, they're not, but I just wonder, if you're not overly concerned, or if it is not the number one thing to win, because we'll get to DeMar DeRozan. Why I think they want DeMar is because they need someone to print on that schedule, right? They need
Yeah.
someone on that poster. So if you can get LeBron to put on that poster to continue to just have the best attendance, because they've screwed themselves to being able to make 4 or 5 moves over the next few years to be there. That's kind of where it's more of your headliner,
Yeah.
and just continue to keep that place full than thinking you're going to climb in the standings.
I just don't think that's like if you were gonna like get LeBron out of LA, it's gonna just take more than that. I mean, I think
Not blood.
I tried to put
blood.
I tried to put this in the
Man.
story. I just don't think Judson. I think it's like I think he wants it, but not as badly as in the past. Like wanted in the way that like when it's 3 or 4 years down the road, it sounds like a good idea. It sounds like a goal that's worth pushing for. And then as it gets closer, you look at it and say, maybe this isn't best for everybody. I mean, Bronny James flat out in Chicago said this is not his dream, right? His dream is to make the NBA. Yeah, I don't think about playing with my dad. My dad says it. I don't think, I know he says it. It's not what I'm thinking about. And then, you talk to people like around LeBron and you talk to people around Bronny, and it's like the agency, like Rich Paul has said it. Like nobody's really saying this will work. I mean, actually, if anything, they're saying the explicit opposite. That this will not work as a plan. I still think that, like I try to point out this in the story, I don't know that everybody believes that, but I think it's a very specific type of situation that it has the most credibility, right? Like, and to me, I look at Chicago and obviously they've been rebuild adverse here over the last handful of seasons, really since the Lonzo Ball knee injury, who I saw dunking in a video, by the way, recently. Progress. Progress. But I think Justin, I just don't
surgery. But go on.
Yeah. Still one more than I've had in the last 5 years.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. It would take the two of us to come up with one dunk.
The
me lifting you.
Yeah. So I think Justin. So I mean, I think like it just doesn't seem to me that it would be the kind of place that like LeBron would want to go, regardless. No. Now, if it was the Knicks, like maybe. If it was Cleveland, maybe Miami, maybe. I'm just speculating. This isn't reporting, but like like those kinds of situations where it's like ready-made title plus Bronny, plus like the chance to cement your legacy, and ideally a place that holds some deeper meaning to you. That all being said, like if that situation presented itself to LeBron James, I still think he's on the Lakers. It just like that just seems the road that this is going down, almost regardless. But
yeah, it sounds
like I had in my story.
Dad helped me get drafted. Don't touch
so
me on the roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Like, I hesitate to say the Bronny thing is confusing and complex, and because like from the outside it does look like that 100%. I think it's important to remember that the people that are scouting Bronny, the people whose voices in these rooms should be most kind of trustworthy on this type of stuff, have been scouting Bronny James much longer than his USC tape, right? Like that this is a player who has been playing, in high-level stuff. He's played for a very prominent high school in Southern California. Has played on prominent AU teams, and like what is that, EEYBL, like stuff like that. He played in the McDonald's All-American game, played for Team USA, played with the Nike Hoop Summit, and then he had a heart attack. Yeah, I'm sorry, full on cardiac arrest in July, right? And then struggled, came back and did not have a good season at USC. Just after missing the first 2 months of it, and dealing with the after effects of that. I think there are people who, if his name was Bronny Smith, would look at this player and they would see 6'1.5" and they would cringe. But they would also see McDonald's All-American. They would also see a player who worked himself into a real prospect between his junior and senior year, and a guy who has a 40.5-inch vertical, has a +6 wingspan, and has some of the tools, not all, but some of the tools that you would want to see from a role player in the NBA. the ability to make open shots and compete on defense. Like those are things that teams want. If you are 6'1", if you're 6'6", if you're 6'6", you can do those things a little less frequently than if you're 6'1". But I do think like a name that I hear a lot, Judson, for him is, DeAnthony Melton, which, again, very good college player, has become a very good pro, but he is a guy who's not big, and a guy who did not make shots coming out of college, who worked himself into that. And I think there's some confidence, when it comes to things like you mentioned earlier, like character and stuff like that. And certainly this is where LeBron helps. I mean, he has the guidebook when it comes to things like work ethic and diet and nutrition and physical fitness and those types of resources, right? That's where I think the real sort of parental advantage comes. I generally don't think that Bronny James, I mean, I know Bronny James doesn't want to do this just because of his dad. That's not help that he wants. He was asked that point blank. He said no. There's really no reason to believe anything other than that, other than he wants to be in the NBA. He wants to have the same sort of vocation.
Help me understand DeMar DeRozan a little bit. Well, number one, I don't really understand why the Bulls are as interested as they are in DeMar, because everything you hear is that DeMar is going to return to the Bulls. He's an aging player. He's got an aging style of play. It's a mid-range game for a team that just needs to do something to start over, right? But again, attendance is number one. You've got to have somebody that you can sell to be out there. But I think more importantly, I don't understand why DeMar wants to be a Bull. DeMar, 15 years in the league, incredible amount of individual accolades. He is so well respected by his peers, and he has made a tremendous amount of money, obviously. A team that seems stuck in neutral, I don't understand why DeMar, who I think has 2 good years left, Dan, I don't understand why he wouldn't want to be on a team where he can get to the one thing of all of those accolades I just mentioned. The one he doesn't have is a ring. Why is he not looking for somewhere he could go that's going to give him a real chance to have a deep run and even go all the way?
I mean, I think, look, right, we'll see what situations present themselves to him. I mean, I can think of Philadelphia's cap space, for instance, right, Judson? And, they've been linked to Paul George. They will be linked to anybody, any really good player, like to move into money, right? Like they have sort of a win now mindset. Would I be surprised if the Clippers get a deal done with Paul George and the Sixers look at DeMar DeRozan and say, maybe this is the guy we want to put with Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid over the next couple of years? I mean, I wouldn't be shocked by that, and I think that's a good situation for him. I do think, though, like, and I mean this is, and I don't know this about DeMar DeRozan. My dealings with him have always been incredibly positive.
Sure.
I've had some great conversations with him about Kobe Bryant. I covered him at USC for a minute. But I think, with DeMar, like, you want to, I think a lot of times when it comes to ring culture, there's this sort of feeling that, like, if you're not chasing the ring, like you don't care about winning. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think you have guys who care about competing and want to be competitive and you want to be in stuff and you want to be involved. And, in Chicago, right, like he has a chance to make money, have stability. It's a situation he seems very comfortable in.
Right.
He gets to play a prominent role on the team, which matters a lot to guys.
Yep.
Right. Like if you go somewhere and you become the third or fourth option, like that's not fun for everybody. Not everybody does well with that. Right. Like, no, I mean, actually, most people struggle with it. Yeah, most people actually struggle with that, and it's not an indictment on him and wanting to win or losing. Maybe I think he just maybe knows who he is.
Yeah, I just because I agree with you, right? That at times I do think we make too much of guys. First of all, I think players 99% of the time they need to go where they can make the most money, right?
Mm-hmm.
But of the players that have done everything, where at the end of the road, why not see if I could put myself in a place to play in these biggest games, even if you are the third or fourth option? DeMar is in line to have done all of those things. I mean, he's been the primary scorer, right? He's been the number one guy. He's done it for so long, where I just don't understand why an organization that seems to be set on aiming towards the play-in game why he wouldn't aim for more, because I do expect him to be back with the Bulls. One more for you at the NBA Combine. Um, any word on Zach LaVine? Any rumor mill about Zach?
I mean, I think he lives in this place right now where
Seattle?
his value on the
I
open
don't know where
market
he lives.
is, yeah, I don't know either. Probably Seattle or
LA?
LA.
That's probably
Yeah,
LA.
where
He doesn't live next
where he
door to you, Dan?
no, he's not. He's not
You
currently
guys don't
outside.
carpool?
Getting shots up. But it's this weird thing, and there have been times this has been true about players I've covered. I think it was probably true, Judson, when we were in the Charger land towards the end with Philip Rivers, where your value to your organization exceeds your value on the trade market, right? Like, and I think with Zach LaVine, like there is a world in which the Bulls could trade Zach LaVine. He has a big contract and is coming off a
Yeah.
season where he barely played because of injury. So you are not going to get equal value. You are actually probably going to be paying taxes
It's
on
gonna
those
cost them
two
more.
on those
Right.
two things. So it's things that you hear about teams that would be like, yeah, I'd be interested in Zach LaVine. They don't want to give up real assets. They don't want to give up real draft picks. Like, in fact, a lot of times you hear things like, we should be taking stuff back
Yep.
from Chicago. And Zach LaVine, I believe, is too talented to add stuff to give away, right? Like, that doesn't make sense. But it also makes sense if I was running, the Seattle Supersonics, if that was the team that I had, I wouldn't look at the situation and say, I'm looking at stars. I need a player. Zach LaVine is a guy I'm going to push real assets behind because of the contract and mostly because of the injuries, right?
Yeah.
It is, again, like, and I do think it does correlate a little bit with your DeRozan point, which is also sort of like, you look at the situations you're in and you look at where you can maximize your earnings and different things like that. I mean, if you're a player like DeMar DeRozan, generally speaking, and you want to go to a contender, you're taking the mid-level exception. Like, that is like basically the pathway to a really good team. And if you're doing that on a really good team, you're probably the fourth or fifth option, usually speaking. And if you're a player like who likes to touch the ball, who's a rhythm player and who's operated with volume in the past, that's kind of it's hard casting. It's just really, really hard. Now, I'm not suggesting DeMar DeRozan would have some sort of Russell Westbrook type fall if he were to go to the wrong situation, or Zach LaVine the same. I mean, it's just you take the ball out of these guys' hands and you move them into different roles. Who's to say? Now, if you get it right, you have Aaron Gordon on your hands, right? Who is a top option in Orlando, who has played an incredible role for Denver over these last few years. One of the most important transactions in the league, in my opinion, over the last
Zach been
handful of
connected
years.
to one team? Have you heard a rumor about LaVine?
No, I mean, like,
no,
not really. I mean, there are places you can look around the league and you can see where like it might make some sense.
right.
Like, it's not hard to like imagine him, with
But
the
his
Orlando
stock,
Magic.
his stock has plummeted that much.
It's low. It's low.
Right.
Yeah, it's really low.
Right.
And I
Is
mean,
it
I
lower than
think
it
the other
should
thing
be?
is probably a little. I mean, I like the player more than the
injury.
trade market,
Yeah.
but it's the injury and it's also the style of player, right? Like, it is like one of these things that I think that if you are a ball in hand type of NBA basketball player, so if you have to be a primary type option, right? Is sort of the feeling. How good can a team be if Zach LaVine is your primary on the ball option? And I think this is a thing that teams have really struggled with as they've tried to put together these 2 and 3 star teams. The Phoenix Suns are a great example. 3 terrific on the ball players. How do you win and how do you impact winning off the ball if you're Bradley Beal, if you're Devin Booker, if you're Kevin Durant? You're going to end up standing around more than you like in the modern NBA. You're going to be standing in the corner, doing things like that. It's crazy. I mean, I don't think this is like that revelatory, but it's true. If you polled 30 general managers around the NBA, which player they'd rather have be there standing in the corner and giving them stuff on the other side, Bradley Beal or Jaden McDaniels, you're going to hear a lot more people vote for Jaden McDaniels than the talent would suggest.
No doubt.
And I think that's sort of a LaVine issue, is like, what does he do if he's not scoring for you? Right. And I think there's a complimentary-ish player in there, but the injuries have really slowed it down.
Yeah, I still hear, even before the injuries, when he was connected this season, when he was connected to trade rumors, and Adrian Wojnarowski said teams want to know if teams don't know if he's a winning player, and it's like, oof, like I was trying to think of a good analogy for like a guy or what's like a dude analogy. Be like, I just don't know if he's a winning player. Be like Dan is just a bad road trip friend, and it's like, oof, like that just
Yeah.
that
Well, no, to
hurts.
what it is, it's the kind of thing like it's sort of like he's great to have a beer with, but you never let him babysit.
Okay, all right, you got
Like,
it. Yeah, yeah.
like
That
it's some
that was
version of
much better
like
than mine.
where it is like where there is like a level of indictment there that
Yeah,
isn't necessarily like. I mean, not everybody should babysit. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's the thing with scorers in the NBA right now is like to go from scorer to winner is it's a challenge. You have to be pretty transcendent if that's really all you're doing. And I think to go full circle, I mean, you look at someone like Anthony Edwards, and like he is a transcendent type scorer plus impacts the game with his defense,
yeah.
right? Like I mean, and
Zach's
that's a
like the
huge
guy.
difference.
Zach's the guy where he reaches out. He's like, "Hey, you want to go to Vegas?" And Dan would have to say, "Well, who else is going?" Because you're not exactly sure.
Are we
Where
bringing cameras? We're not bringing cameras, right? Like that's some version of that.
exactly. Yeah. Woj is like, well, who else is going? Zach, that's what
Yeah.
teams really want to know. Dan, I appreciate it. Good stuff, man. You're the
Thanks,
best.
Judson.
Thanks for your time.
Appreciate you, buddy.